And joining us this morning, Congressman Lloyd Doggett. Thank you very much for joining us. We have a lot to talk about today. Let's start with healthcare. There's a new AP GFK healthcare poll out that talks a little bit about kind of the really strong opposition that we saw starting to subside. There's a vote this week. Kind of get us up to speed on what's going on.
There is a vote this week, and if it were to repeal the existing law, we would see, for example, seniors have to pay more for cancer screenings, other types of preventive care. We would see an end to the effort to close what's called the donut hole gap in Medicare coverage, which is really important to seniors who have high prescription drug bills. We would see the Medicare Trust Fund solvency reduced by about 12 years. These are reforms that we made that in all of the big debate last year got overlooked. And for the typical Austin family who maybe has a child with a disability or someone who has had a health care problem, again, insurance companies could discriminate based on pre-existing conditions, and they could run into problems getting coverage. I think, in short, to repeal this law means that the deficit, the national debt, goes up, and the insurance premiums for families go up as well.
Are you surprised, because there was so much opposition, it was so heated, are you surprised to start to see it ebbing away?
I think people are beginning to realize the benefits from what I think is a very flawed piece of legislation. Had I been writing it, it would have been effective far before 2014, which is when many of the provisions come out. So people confused, misled perhaps by some of the information, but basically only hearing the bad and not very much feeling the benefit that this new law offers them. I think that we'll have a good debate that hopefully will inform people more of how much they stand to lose if this effort were to prevail to just undo the law. All that's offered as an alternative are platitudes. The protection from insurance monopolies in this law is very real. I don't want insurance monopolies getting between people and their doctor, and that I don't think a family should be dependent on an insurance contract, the fine print, that they didn't have a chance to have any say in negotiating, but can really limit their rights.
What do you think will happen with the vote this week?
I think in the House there'll be a vote given Republican control to repeal, but I don't think that they'll be able to get this passed in the Senate. What will happen is that throughout the year, because this is a very complex law, there'll be continued efforts to chip away at it and to do whatever the insurance monopolies want in the House. I hope we can forestall it in the Senate.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the debt. $14 trillion. It's a record debt. Where do we go from here?
Well, we were just talking that you have new twins. I have a new granddaughter. I don't think we should be shifting all the responsibility for the cost of our government, or at least so much of it, to them. I'm very concerned about the size of that debt. That's one of the reasons that I opposed the deal between President Obama and Republicans back at Christmas that looked so bipartisan but drove up the debt by almost another $1 trillion. I thought that was a mistake. We need to take a close look at every dollar of spending, and we also need to look at the revenue side. Republicans said that they would cut $100 billion from President Obama's budget. They now are already kind of backtracking from that because there's not a line in the federal budget that says waste, fraud, and abuse. It requires careful scrutiny of every expenditure, and it requires looking at the revenue side as well.
Well, do you expect to see some cuts?
I do, and anyone who can identify a program that is inefficient, and there are some, or find ways to improve the efficiency of our programs, I'm all for. I think we need to be very careful in how we forward aid to the states. One of the other battles that I'm involved in right now is to stand up on the side of parents who don't want to see these neighborhood schools closed here in Austin.
Right.
One of the reasons that they are up for closure is the fact that the state of Texas is not supporting public education in a reasonable way. I have a legislation signed into law last year that would get almost $20 million to the Austin Independent School District and could help forestall those cuts. As you know, the state of Texas is very much in debt right now, too, And the management of that has to be looking at both the revenue side and the spending side.
When you talk about closing Austin schools, I mean, they're looking at like a $70 million shortfall. $20 million wouldn't quite close that gap.
Well, it would take care of the problem for this year.
Right.
It would, as it relates to school closing. No, it won't solve all the problem, and that budget gap could be larger or smaller depending on what the decisions are that the state of Texas makes on public education aid. I believe that last year the amount of this money, had it been signed by Governor Perry to accept it, would have just about closed the entire gap of the current year. That gap is growing, you're right, and we need to do more, but I think this would prevent the schools, certainly most of them, from having to be closed this year if we could get this money from the federal government that's sitting there. Texas is one of only 2 states that has not taken its share of these dollars. The governor says there's a string attached. The only string, really, is that education aid must be used for our public schools.
Let's switch gears and talk a little bit about new census numbers come in, redistricting.
Yes. Well, you know, I've had a chance to represent much of Texas, just not all at the same time. And the redistricting that was done by Tom DeLay, much of that same spirit still lives there at the Capitol. But I'm hopeful there'll be a recognition that we have something very unique here in the greater Austin area that should be preserved. We're entitled to have our voice in Congress reflecting Austin, greater Austin, Central Texas values, just like Midland or Amarillo or Houston. The idea that we would continue to split this community apart in so many different ways is really unfair. It's particularly unfair to voters who were communities that were split up in our community in the past, and I hope that with a strong voice, forceful presentation, that our Austin voice will be protected.
I know you hope that, but do you think that we're going to see that, or?
I think that when there's such an overreaching to say, you know, some of Austin is already represented by members of the Tea Party caucus. I have about half of it. The idea that we would impose Tea Party rule on all of our community is really unfair. And I think if people speak up forcefully and with the laws that exist under the Voting Rights Act, we have a chance, it's an uphill climb, to preserve a district that is Austin-based. We deserve to have our representation rather than have it split every way and impose Tea Party rule on everyone.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate your time.